Hi, I'm Tara, and welcome to Let's Do Books. I'm excited because this week, Fiona Riley is back. She is the author of 6 lesbian romances. The latest is called Not Since You, and it's available everywhere from Bold Strokes Books. Welcome, Fiona.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm excited. This book is, I worked on this book a lot, and I'm really excited for it to come out. It comes out in November, so that's something I'm really passionate about right now.
So does this episode, which we are timing to come out around the same time as your book. And so we are talking about second chance romances. We each have 2 that we're going to talk about that we recommend. And actually this episode was inspired by the fact that this book is a second chance romance. So do you want to tell people a little bit of what it's about?
So Not Since You is about 2 women who were, high school lovers. They got together kind of by accident in high school. One was a tutor. They came from different sides of the world, and one went to college, and the other one stayed home. And something happened while they were away. They broke up, and there was a serious loss for the other character that stayed home. And she, feeling devastated, just uprooted her life, just disappeared. And when the other one came back to find her to kind of, rekindle the flame, she wasn't there anymore. And there was just kind of empty gap where there wasn't quite closure. And everything was sort of, broken. But it was a new change in her life, a new phase, and both women started on their own existence. And so the book starts about 10 years later. The main character, Charlotte, is on her honeymoon cruise, or what should be her honeymoon, except she didn't get married, and she couldn't cancel the cruise, and she couldn't get her money back. So she decided to go single on a honeymoon cruise, and she runs into her ex-love, Lexi, who's the head bartender on a cruise ship. So they're on a cruise ship together, and they sort of reconnect in really awkward, uncomfortable ways for a little while. And that's how they kind of bring themselves back together and see, what's happened in 10 years. A lot happens in 10 years, especially when you're 17 and all of a sudden you're nearing 30.
Oh, well, that sounds like a lot of fun. I can't wait to read it. And hopefully by the time this airs, I will have read it. So what is it that you love about second chance romances?
I mean, what made me want to write Not Since You was, I think we all have like that first love's history, right? Like we have that first love story, like the first person we crushed on, the first person we kissed, the first person we loved. There's something special about firsts. I won't say that they're the most important things, but there is definitely something special about a first. And I think when it comes to second chance romances, especially when you're young and you're broken up or you're divided because life is sort of too big for you when you're in your teens and 20s, right? Maybe, or at least in your teens. Life is so big. There's so much happening. There's so much changing. It's really important that you find yourself and you grow in your own way. And you can grow with someone, but you're growing through so much on your own. I think that that's something so exciting about a young love. And having the chance to rekindle that young love when you're a little older, a little wiser, a little more stable. I think there's something magical about that because you have something to draw back on, some history together, which I think history sometimes can be a good thing. It can be a bad thing, but it can be a good thing too, I think.
Yeah. So what is the first book that you recommend?
So the most recent book that I loved, really, that had a second chance romance was actually Strawberry Summer. I believe it came out last year by Melissa Brayden. I love this book. I'm going to read the synopsis for you, and then I'll tell you kind of like why I love this book. So Strawberry Summer, it says, just because you're through with your past doesn't mean it's through with you. Margaret Beringer didn't have an easy adolescence. She hated her name, was less popular in school, and was always cast aside as the farm kid. However, with the arrival of Courtney Carrington, Margaret's youth sparked into color. Courtney was smart, beautiful, and put together. Everything Margaret wasn't. Who would have imagined that they'd fit together so perfectly? But first loves can scar. Margaret hasn't seen Courtney in years, and that's for the best. But when Courtney loses her father and returns to Tanner Peak to take control of the family store, Margaret comes face to face with her past and the woman she's tried desperately to forget. The fact that Courtney has grown up more beautiful than ever certainly doesn't help matters. I mean, that's the perfect synopsis for a second chance romance, right? Mm-hmm. Like, they were together, they were perfect for each other, something didn't work out, they get separated, they reunite, they're more beautiful than they remember, and there's so much history and so much emotion and passion that's just sitting there waiting to be stirred back up. I love that. I love everything about that. And there's something wonderful about a small town. So Strawberry Summer takes place in a small town, and one of the reasons I like this book so much is it's first person. So you spend a lot of time, you're with Margaret Barringer the whole time. And it's a little bit of a step from Melissa Brayden. Most of her stuff is third person. Mm-hmm. But this book it's just so well done because you feel all the pain that Margaret goes through from just growing up and finding herself and then having life's obstacles and then losing her stability in Courtney and then kind of growing up. And I think there's something so unique about that and so personal that it just really sat with me. So the challenges that they had in this book I thought were really fantastic and they were realistic. And I could put myself in her shoes, even though I'm significantly older than she was when the story starts. I could put myself in her shoes, no problem. I could just see myself there. I could get it. I understood it. And it felt really real and tangible to me. And I think that that's one of the reasons why I so enjoyed Strawberry Summer, because there was just so much of it that I could draw from my own youth, from the challenges I faced as my own coming out when I was younger, and then just kind of navigating that nervous first love when you're still figuring things out. And I think Melissa Brayden did a really great job of that between Margaret and Courtney.
Oh, yeah. I love this book. And I think you're right. Most of her books are in the third person. I think maybe her first book, Waiting in the Wings, was in I haven't read it in years, though, so I might have just made an ass of myself, which, whatever. That's fine. But the thing that I really liked about this, and I think I talked about it in one or both of my reviews, was that in each of the different stages of their lives, because this does happen like kind of in stages, I was really impressed that it was almost like the style changed so that when they're in high school it felt like a YA book.
Right.
When they're in college it feels like a new adult romance. When they're adult it just feels like a contemporary romance. But because all along they're growing, it still feels natural. There isn't like any weird dissonance between each of the parts. It doesn't feel as strange as it should to have like 3 different types of romance styles in there. It just works. And it works really, really well.
I felt like she did a really great job with because a lot of this book does happen in the past, to build up to the contemporary part where we're talking towards the end where they're older. She does a great job with reminiscing and with memories and flashbacks without making it feel jarring. And without making you have to, like, I didn't have to ever go back and read the last chapter or the last past chapter. That was another reminiscent chapter and kind of see where things were. Like, it easily lined up for me and it seemed like a very seamless transition. And I think that's something that's hard to do. As a writer for myself, I think it's very hard to jump back into a flashback and to keep the reader and also not to lose the tone of the story. And I think that was done really well in this book. So the flashbacks added to the story. They didn't detract from it. And I thought that was really important.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's just a damn good second chance story. Like,
it's so good.
Yeah, like having to work out the things that didn't work before and getting to that like really believable happily ever after in a way that's really satisfying. Yeah, I don't know. She's just really good.
It's a good one. Yeah, she's good. She's a very talented writer. But this particular book, I thought it sat with me. There's a twist towards the end that's really kind of caught me off guard, which doesn't happen often. And then the fact that you don't know what's happening in Courtney's mind is both frustrating and fantastic. Because I think part of me, as someone who writes in the third person and prefers that, wanted to know her side of the story. But in the same degree, I really liked that I only knew Margaret's side. I really liked that was all I had. Because it gave me a little more passion and a little more fire and a little more anger and sadness because I was on one side. So I would love to see, if I could ever ask someone to write another, mirror their book, I would love to see Courtney's perspective for this book because I think that she could add such depth to the story. Because as a character, I was actually more attracted to Courtney. Like I was more drawn to her because I didn't know anything about her. And I think that was very mysterious and interesting to me. But I just thought it was a great book. I highly recommend it.
Ditto. I'm the same. So my first book is Once Ghosted, Twice Shy by Alyssa Cole, which is a novella that's part of her Reluctant Royals series. So the rest of the series, I believe, are all opposite sex pairings, but this one is not. This one has 2 women. The blurb for this one is, while her boss, the prince, was busy wooing his betrothed, Likotsi had her own love affair after swiping right on a dating app, but her romance had ended in heartbreak, and now, back in New York City again, she's determined to rediscover her joy. So of course she runs into the woman who broke her heart. When Likotsi and Fabiola meet again on a stalled subway train months later, Fab asks for just 1 cup of tea. Likotsi, hoping to know why she was unceremoniously dumped, agrees. Tea and food soon leads them to exploring the city together and their past, with Fab slowly revealing why she let Likotsi go, and both of them wondering if they can turn this second chance into a happily ever after. This book is super good, and it's quite short because it's a novella. This book is really good, and it truly doesn't matter if you haven't read the rest of the series, because, I mean, all you have to know is that Likotsi works for a prince of a fake African place. And so they are in New York, and it really is that, like, she's had her heart broken 9 months prior, and she's decided, this is it. I am going to change the relationship that I have with New York City. It's no longer going to be the place where I fell in love. It's going to be a place where I forge new memories. And of course, that's the morning that she runs into the woman that she had fallen in love with. And the thing that's really interesting about how the narrative is set up is that it alternates perspectives between the chapters, but not only perspectives, also timelines. So the first chapter is Likotsi as she's kind of going to go about her business in New York in the present. The second chapter, we get Fabiola's perspective as she falls for Likotsi the first time around. So we get kind of alternating between the second chance and the first chance, and seeing what happened as they kind of make their way back together at the end. And it just works. I wasn't sure at first, and then the more I read it, the more I was charmed. And they have this great chemistry. It's super easy to see why they fell for each other. And Likotsi is this, like, gorgeous, dapper, butch woman who's incredibly charming and lovely, but also is, you know, she's a little gun shy. She had her heart broken, and we find out why Fab had to break it off. It was quite sad, but made a lot of sense, and I just really like this one a whole lot.
Sounds great.
And because it's a novella, it doesn't take that long to read. So you can just, like, pick it up and read it in an afternoon.
Oh, I love it. That's vital for my current stage in life.
You're listening to The Lesbian Talk Show. TheLesbianTalkShow.com, your hub of podcast information.
So what is your next book?
So the second book I read, I actually just finished. It's a new release. It's from Elle Spencer, and it's called Road to Madison. I'm going to read the synopsis for you, and then I'll let you know kind of what my thoughts were. As the sole heir to her family's banking empire, a lot is expected of Madison Prescott. Falling in love with her childhood friend, Anna Perez, was not in the cards. As Madison's father puts it, a gay daughter married to the maid's daughter, running my company over my dead body. By the time George Prescott dies, it's been 15 years since Madison and Anna were ripped apart by his lies. They haven't spoken since, but Madison has spent every waking minute waiting for this day to come. Unfortunately, it turns out time doesn't heal all wounds. Why was Madison willing to give up everything in the face of her father's threats, and why can she never tell Anna the truth about what really separated them? Caught between a present they can't trust and a past they can't forget, Madison and Anna must decide if this is their second chance or final heartbreak. Another awesome blurb. This book, the opening chapter in this book caught me right away. You know, it's got a really dramatic opening. You know in the blurb that the father dies. You know that there's been absence between a couple that was together in their youth. But I don't think you understand how profoundly everyone in this book hates George Prescott until you open the first chapter and he's literally being put in the ground. So this is the first book I've read where there was a funeral scene as the opening chapter of a book. And it sounds like it would be kind of morose, but it was actually really fitting. It set the tone for the book and it set the tone for all the people involved and how hated this person was by everyone, his driver, all the people that worked for him, his daughter. And it really did a really nice job of establishing Madison's perspective and how she's been caged for 15 years. And you see a lot of passion from Madison, tears and angry and anguish, and just you see how terrible this man was. And it sets up the book, which then also goes and does some flashbacks, living back to the past when they were much younger, when the girls first got together. And this book is a little different. So in Strawberry Summer, those girls met as teenagers. In Road to Madison, they meet as 7 and 8-year-old girls. So there's a lot more like just friendship, familiarity that happens. You know, Madison's mother's gone and she doesn't have a family except for her father, who's kind of a monster. But Anna has a really great, loving mother. And so they have this really interesting dynamic where Madison's doesn't have a mom and she's, you know, navigating an 8-year-old life. And there's these little hiccups that happen throughout. And you see the girls from their very young age, and then it jumps to teens, and then, you know, it comes to present day. And it's interesting to see how they progress and how their story starts out as a friendship, a loving friendship, like they're best friends, and how, you know, Anna lives on the property that Madison is essentially a prisoner to. She lives in this massive property, and Anna is there, and she's really her only friend, but she turns out to be the only one that matters as they grow up and they, you know, go their separate ways. But this story was so interesting. There's a lot of action in this book. There's a lot of things that happen sort of unexpectedly. I mean, you've read the stories before where, like, parents don't approve of their gay kids, kids figure a way to make it work or not work, whatever. Like, that's not a new theme. Like, that's definitely happened. But this is the way this is told, and the lengths that George Prescott goes to keep the women apart is just diabolical. Like, it's absolutely terrible. Like, every time I thought, I was like, oh, he's like a real jerk. Then something else happened, and I was like, oh, man, like this guy's like rough. Like,
yeah.
I think it almost had to be that severe to keep them apart. And I think that that's such an interesting story. So they were together. The father made some threats that were not idle, and they separated. And for the time that they're apart, Madison literally is holding bated breath, waiting for him to die. And Anna's moved on, and she has a life. And it's just like one of them's been caged and waiting, and the other one disregarded that life and has moved on. And then that fallout that happens when you realize something you've been waiting your whole life for, or the last 15 years for, might not come to fruition, is such an interesting perspective and storyline. Because you see Madison like fall apart when she realizes that she's finally free and she has nowhere to go and no dream to hold, which is so sad, because you're cheering for her. You know her side a little clearer than Anna's side in the beginning. And eventually, you get to know them both. But it's just such an interesting perspective to see that. And I think it's really well done. And like I said, there's a couple of twists in this book that are super interesting. And it's a really beautiful story about two best friends that fell in love. And then some really crappy things happened by one really powerful man, and then them trying to go back and fix those holes years and years later. And I think that was a really interesting way to show a relationship, because a lot happens in 15 years, a lot happens in 5 years, a lot happens in 1 year. And I think that we forget that when time moves, that life moves. And so to go back and try to put those pieces back in a box that doesn't exist anymore, it was challenging. One character really wanted past, and the other one wanted the best parts of the past, but was fearful to accept it. And I think the book was really well done. It was interesting. I really was surprised by a lot. And I really fell for Madison and Anna. I think they were really cute at the end, and they were cute together. And there was just a lot of really anecdotally cute things that happened throughout. Like when they're 7 and 8, when they meet, and one of them's missing her front teeth and eating a banana, and she has a lisp. Like it's really charming and really cute.
Uh-huh.
And they have these like little, moments together. Like one had to go to prom with a boy because her father wanted her to, and the other one's a little jealous, and that's when they first realized that they like each other. So it was really cute, because you were able to put yourself in that perspective too, of like, this was a young romance that blossomed into something more, like we talked about before, about with Strawberry Summer. So, Road to Madison.
Sounds great. I haven't read it, but I'm looking forward to it. It's one that I've had my eye on. I like Elle Spencer. She writes really engrossing romances. Like those books that are really hard to put down, and you may not even know why, but it's like, it's 3 a.m. and I'm still reading Casting Lacey. What's going on? The
opening to this book was so good. I had to listen to this in audiobook. I have a new daughter, and I have a very young little daughter, and it's hard for me to read at night because I really need to be sleeping when they're sleeping. So I do a lot of audiobooks right now, and I listen to this in the car. And Laurie Prince, who is no secret one of my favorite narrators, narrated this book. And I listened to the first chapter twice because the first chapter is so gripping. It just gets you so fast that I was like, no, they can't. Did they really do that? Like, she took her gloves off to do that. Like, it was really good. I think, get into this book, read the first chapter, and you'll see there's just such great character development in Madison in that first chapter that it hooked me right away. So this is my first Elle Spencer novel, actually. I haven't read any more. I've read the novella that you put out and a couple little small things, but I haven't read Casting Lacey yet. I've heard wonderful things, but this one just grabbed me from the blurb, and the first chapter hooked me.
I'm looking forward to her new one, too. It'll be out by the time this is out, 30 dates in 30 days. I mean, I think the title pretty much says it all about the premise. And I don't know.
You never know with Elle Spencer, though, because I thought this told me everything was going to happen in the blurb, and then I was like totally side-swiped twice, at least.
You make a good point. All right. Anyway, go read this book, people. So my last book is Delay of Game by Tracey Richardson. And the blurb for this says, passion and patriotism sizzle on the ice at the Winter Olympics. It's been a dozen years since two of the world's best women hockey players, Nikki Hartling and Eva Caruso, first competed against each other in the Olympic Games. The pressure of the intense USA-Canada rivalry forced an end to their love affair, and both women moved on. Nikki to coach and to marry, Eva to stretch out a playing career that her ravaged body can barely sustain anymore. The games are upon them once again. Eva wants one last chance to beat the Canadians and win hockey's biggest prize. Nikki, now a widow and single mother, strives to coach her country to gold, even as the obstacles against her mount. The locker room seems to have ears, and there are few people Nikki and Eva can trust. Rivals and former lovers on hockey's biggest stage, will Nikki and Eva feel the same spark that first brought them together? And can they win on and off the ice with the whole world watching? I liked this book very much. I am not a sports person, and I hope I don't lose my Canadian citizenship by saying I don't watch hockey. But it really actually doesn't matter if you're a sports fan or not. This is not one of those books where you have to know all the rules of the game or have to learn the rules of the game to understand what's going on in the book. That occasionally happens with sports romances. It's not the case with this one. I will admit I probably have an extra little bit of fondness for it because Nikki is actually coaching sports at the university where I did my undergraduate degree.
Oh.
And the Canadian team does a lot of training at the University of Calgary because there's a lot of, and I live in Calgary now, and that's where actually a lot of Olympic training happens because we had the Olympics here in 1988. So, I don't know. I never get to read books about things that happen in places I know in Canada.
This was A+ to start.
Yeah, so right away I was like, yay! And then it turns out, right? I know. Canadian places I know and love. So obviously that's a weird bar to have, but you know what? That's one of my bars. It's just what it is. But I was really kind of charmed by this romance and seeing where they ended up in all the years since they'd been together, because life really did move on. Especially for Nikki, like she found a super lovely woman that she married. They had a daughter. She got out of playing and into coaching instead. But it is kind of one of those, like, as much as their lives have moved on, and Eva, like she really kicked ass at hockey and is heading up the team and, has that problem, unfortunately, of you can only play competitive hockey for so long before your body starts to hate you, and she's definitely in that stage. But so they have kind of all these things, and like Nikki's like she's very happy to be coaching, but it's not like she's not a player anymore, and her daughter is massively important to her, which is as it should be. And so like they just have different priorities now, and even still there's something there. Like there was something that, as much as everything else changed, this one thing between them kind of is still the same. That chemistry is there, that affection. And I really loved seeing the way they came together, having to figure out, how can their lives work? Because obviously they're not living in the same place. How do you make lives mesh when you don't live in the same place? One of you has a child. Careers are in flux because Eva's not going to be able to really play for much longer. How is that going to work? And I thought Tracey Richardson just did a fabulous job. And I mean, who doesn't like an Olympic romance? I think those are like crack for a lot of people. So
I mean, they're definitely winning for sure.
I
live in Boston, and like we have a lot of sports here. I'm a big sports person. I like sports romances. I think they're really interesting. I think it gives a different aspect because you have the constants of competition and challenge and the physicality of it. And I like that as a background, like third character. I think that's important to have that. It's interesting. I think if you think of the sport as its own, character in the book, it helps to give a little bit more, richness to the story. So I'm not deterred from it. I'm excited about it.
Do it. Now I want to go on a tangent about Olympic romances, but that's not what this podcast is about.
It's about second chances or reunion romance.
That's right. But that's the 4 that we brought. And for any of our listeners that need even more recommendations, we have got the goods for you at the Lesbian Review. We have a top 10 list, which I'll link to in the show notes. And also we just have a tag for all of the second chance romances that we reviewed. And we reviewed a buttload of them. So you can go and read to your heart's content. And I'll link to that as well. So Fiona, where can people find you online if they want to connect with you?
You can go to FionaRileyFiction.com if they want to check out my website. If they go through Bold Strokes Books, which is my publisher, you can see links to all my Twitter accounts, my Facebook, my Instagram. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram all the time. I love my social media. I'd love to hear from readers, and I love your input. It's really important to me as an artist to be able to hear that kind of perspective, and it helps me motivate me to write. So please, by all means, reach out. And Not Since You comes out soon, and I really love this book. This book takes place on a lesbian cruise in the Caribbean, and it's tight quarters and a lot of tension, and there's some really funny, awkward times, and you have to ask yourself, you were stuck on a ship with the love of your life and things didn't happen the way you wanted them to, and and then there's no holds barred and you can do whatever you want as long as you don't get caught. Then that kind of makes things pretty interesting. So I would say check out the book. It's a great second chance romance. I'm totally biased, but but it comes out soon. It was an absolute blast to write. I did a lot of research for this. I went on a cruise and then I wrote this book as soon as I got back. So it was my first cruise to do this, and I did so much research on the cruise. I'm surprised it didn't throw me off because I had a lot of questions for a lot of staff. So I will tell you that the things that happened on that cruise ship in the book were well researched.
Wonderful. We will have to do an episode about cruise ship romances sometime. There's Snow Globe by Georgia Beers. There's those those filthy short story collections that Rad and Karen Callmaker did together. There you go. Go get those books too.
It's good. We're going into colder weather in most places, so it's good to get a little hot.
That's right. That is all for this episode. Thank you so much, Fiona, for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
I'm Tara, and you've been listening to Let's Do Books. You can email me at tara@thelesbianreview.com with your questions or comments. Or if you're an author who's interested in joining me on the show to talk about the lesfic you love or trends that have you interested, please let me know. If you've enjoyed this episode, please check out the show notes where you'll find a Patreon link for The Lesbian Talk Show, or visit patreon.com/thelesbiantalkshow. Our patrons get exclusive content like bonus podcasts that no one else gets access to. To find this and many other great shows, all you need to do is search for The Lesbian Talk Show on iTunes, Podbean, Stitcher, or Spotify.